do something for the growth of the economy as a whole and prosperity and increase the number of jobs. That is our objective. Innovation is something which is very often born out of these GCCs. In a number of ways, you generate jobs across the country in all locations.
I want to begin without getting into a lot of details around our framework and all of that. But broadly, when you look at this GCC ecosystem, I was mentioning yesterday that we almost call it as a GCC gold rush. Right? People were, in the last few years especially, we've had this tremendous amount of growth within GCCs, and the number of GCCs and the individual GCCs growing into a larger firms. And you've seen it from a vantage point of view. You look at this as a more how India as a country is attracting these GCCs into India, and the ability for us to support them, ability for us to make sure that they're able to expand, set up, grow in various parts of India. I mean, we don't have an agenda with this city or that city, but across India, I think we've been able to grow. So any broader thoughts around when you look at these companies coming in, setting up, what is the thinking from the government side? I mean, this is something which we want to encourage and grow more, or do we want to shape it in a certain way? In this room, that we probably have hundreds of GCCs and GCC leaders who are participating. Any broad message to them before we get into the details of the framework, etc.?
And quite honestly, I think GCCs and what can happen there is a big priority for the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology and the government in general, which is why in the budget for 2025-26, the finance minister specifically said that we will work on a national level framework as to how GCCs can be encouraged and developed further in the country. I think the main reason that we look at GCCs as as something which requires to be encouraged is that ultimately all government policy and what we are attempting to do in all of these ministries is about increasing the number of jobs, and improving the quality of the jobs. And GCCs fundamentally are about the same thing. Number of higher quality jobs, higher order functions, higher order tasks which get brought into India. And I think nowadays it's not even fashionable to talk about the word outsource, because this is, in a sense, part of a global value chain. There are different things which happen in different locations, and it all gets linked up globally. So I think that is the way business is being done, that is the way work is organized, that is the way tasks are organized. And in that sense, more higher order jobs of engineering R&D, product development, and so on, coming into India is something which India really welcomes, the government welcomes, and we believe that it meets the aspirations of the youth and people who are looking for higher order, higher quality jobs. So to that extent, and ultimately, if they don't leave the country and they work out of here, that also improves whatever is happening in the country, because they then spend their salaries within the country. It increases economic activity. There are second order benefits which clearly work. And more importantly, eventually the other thing that we see is even entrepreneurship and innovation is something which is very often born out of these GCCs. Somebody spends 15 to 20 years, you go and meet many of the mid-career entrepreneurs. They are people who have spent time in GCCs, who've now said, okay, I've done all of this, now let me do something else for myself and let me sort of grow a new order company. Because we run a number of programs across a range of things. For instance, our design-linked incentive scheme, which is to promote semiconductor startup companies, when you actually interact with many of the people who get into it, not all of them are fresh out of colleges or people who have sort of set up in research parks out of universities. They are people who have worked in different companies for a length of time, understand what it is, worked in the design space, in a GCC, and coming out. So in every sense of the word, in terms of quality of jobs, in terms of the boost to the local economy, in terms of second order benefits, in terms of spillover innovation, all of that is something which the government considers as extremely valuable coming out of the GCC industry and hence very focused on promoting it. The other issue which happened during the COVID pandemic was the tendency of many people to work from home and then wanting to continue to work there. And that, again, different governments in different parts of the country have attempted to encourage with reasonable degree of success. You have the Beyond Bangalore initiative in Karnataka. You have all the tidal neoparks which Tamil Nadu has set up to push this industry out. Recently, this issue was specifically discussed in a conference of chief secretaries so that all states can learn from such examples from different parts of India to actually develop GCCs in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Now that again is a win-win situation. For the GCCs, what it means is costs come down tremendously in terms of rentals, in terms of even the housing costs and so on. So there is a significant cost reduction. There is talent retention because there is loyalty which gets built up in these places, because very often when we have interacted with a number of leading companies across the world, while they are looking for talent, they are also very concerned about attrition levels. And at some of the more established centers, attrition is an issue, so they are happier looking at locations where they can retain talent for a longer period of time. There have been success stories around that in places like Kochi, in places like Coimbatore, in many places across Rajasthan, smaller towns. So there have been success stories across the country where this has happened. And I think all of this deserves replication. So that is what the government is truly attempting to do, work with both state governments and with various other ministries in the Government of India to make sure that we are able to support this.
No, clearly, I think as you mentioned, we could sense that there was a tremendous amount of attention and the focus from both the central and the state governments over the, I would say, last maybe 2-3 years. And it kind of culminated into our, various amount of discussion with MeitY and other ministries as well, whether it's finance ministry, and we talked about, I met the chief economic advisor a few times, got him excited about the fact that there are things that we could do with this ecosystem which will be hugely beneficial for the country on the longer period of time. Then eventually, of course, very thankful for the government to have at least the thinking that we need to have this national framework for GCCs. But there's a little bit of of course, we are working it out. The details are being worked out. And thank you for including us as well as part of the process. And I know that you've been, the ministry has been working on detailing it out. Eventually, we'll get to see that at some point in time. But during the process, there was also a little bit of confusion amongst the GCC community that is it only for tier 2, tier 3, or is it a broader framework that we could also use for other GCCs in general, be it you are in a tier 1, tier 2 cities or otherwise. That's number one. I would like to get some of your views. And eventually, what is to be expected out of this framework when it really comes out? Krishnan.
See, I think it's very important to understand that, this is all a chain, right? I mean, the GCC comes out, the companies themselves are multinational, transnational companies who have certain operations at different locations across the world. Now, of course, it's also fashionable for Indian companies to have GCCs in India itself. So it has multiple options which come up. But one thing which also happens is that they also, for two reasons, they try to look at multiple locations. One reason is clearly risk mitigation, saying that if you want to have continuous functioning, if you want to sort of ensure that you have talent flow which is safe and everything else, almost every company that we have spoken to says that we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. We don't want to be in one place. We want to have multiple locations for diversification of risk and for various other purposes. Now, the advantage of tier 2, tier 3 cities, which I already told you, is the fact that they have lower costs and some talent retention is possible. Those advantages are there. But certain other kinds of talent can be found only in pre-existing centers. So there are, I think, in all of this, we cannot separate out and, clearly make a demarcation saying this is a policy which is intended only for tier 2, tier 3 cities. There are a lot of ease of doing business measures. There are a number of other issues which we'll have to address, which will work across the country, regardless of which part of the country we are speaking of. And that will something which will certainly be done. The idea is there a way that we can encourage more of this to go further and further out in the country so that in a number of ways you generate jobs across the country in all locations. Ultimately, one of government's objectives is also that development and the fruits of development need to be spread out and need to be more balanced. So from that perspective, yes, certainly, we would like to encourage it in a number of places. There are some cities and some locations which already have a critical mass, and therefore it's easy for them to attract and easy for them to grow. But then they also develop other disadvantages like high levels of attrition and so on. So I think everyone wants a balance. So it will be this and that. I mean, I don't think it's one to the exclusion of the other. So if you take an example like Beyond Bangalore, now Bangalore has to be there for a Beyond Bangalore to happen. So I think to that extent, GCCs have to be there in tier 1 cities and do well for them to grow and expand into tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So it's not one to the exclusion of the other.
No, that's very.
And the framework, and I think intentionally the word framework has been used. It is not to sort of say that it's a policy or it's basically, I think, again by design, because the intent is to spread it out across different states. Some states took the lead, had the advantage, even without a policy. If you take a city like Bangalore, it developed without initially a policy, but subsequently that became the attraction for others. Other states very actively, we are sitting here in Hyderabad and we are sitting in an area where it was encouraged specifically to grow. Likewise, Pune or other cities have developed around this. Now, the idea is in the framework to try and take the message to all other states saying that this is what different states have done and this is how things have developed. I was in Shillong a few months ago, and you should see the kind of developments which are happening in a city like Shillong. And, they service companies all over the world. And some of the leading tech companies of the world, all their PowerPoint presentations and everything else are made overnight by a small startup based out of Shillong.
Yeah.
So, it's quite amazing as to what the possibilities are. So I think the idea is to expose more and more states and give them a framework in which they can put together policies which will then attract GCCs to those respective states. That's one of the key ideas. The second part of it also is to give an idea to all the ministries in Government of India as to what they need to do to broadly encourage what needs to happen in GCCs. Because in terms of ease of doing business, there are agencies of both the state and the central governments involved. Very often it is also local bodies. And so we need to sort of cover the entire framework. And that is why it's been called a framework and not a policy.
Great. No, I think that's very, very comforting that this is not going to be one specific thing addressing a point in, whether to tier 2, tier 3, etc. And your Shillong example is very good because we think about this capability clusters which is developed over a period of time, be it around a technology, sometimes, cybersecurity. Okay, now let's pick up, maybe Coimbatore starts developing that capability. Similarly, maybe an industry. Oftentimes you find that Chennai and around Chennai, you'll have a lot of automotive type of GCCs, and maybe when you go to maybe a Pune or Mumbai, then you'll have a lot of banking and financial services. So you find that these capability clusters gets developed. And your point, I think if the framework is able to leverage these clusters, at the same time having a micro cluster, which could be, my point I was trying to make is that these smaller cities have no chance of developing by themselves if they're not attached to a larger one. Because GCCs will not go into a new city which has nothing in it and try to set it up, because it makes no sense, because you got to have a developer ecosystem, you got to have people who are working there, you got to have these service providers who are doing something. So I think the thinking of tier 2, tier 3 in isolation will certainly not a good thing. But so ability to sort of look at it holistically and say that how do these capability clusters move, and can you have satellites which will get developed over a period of time rather than they by themselves. So that's something which is very good. But a related topic on that will also be to say, how are we looking at, when you look at this policy, and you mentioned about ease of doing business, one of the things which came up in multiple conversations yesterday is that there is no question that people believe truly that the political leadership, the bureaucratic leadership at the highest level, most ministries, in most cases, both central and state, they all have the right intention, no questions. They all have the right objective to sort of really take it down and make it happen on the ground. However, there is something which gets lost in the translation, that we announce something and then it just doesn't go all the way and then get it implemented. Whether there may be a disconnect between the state and the center and the state, or it could be a disconnect between the department and the implementing agency. I know this is a known problem, and then all of us talk about it. Is there something which we can think of doing? If we need to do something from the industry, we will do that. But is there something which you have thought through that we can make it easier?
I think one of the crucial things which really needs to grow and develop much more between government in general and businesses, and this is work in progress, and this is something which keeps happening constantly, is a question of trust. And that needs to really develop. I mean, that, this is, the industry demand is something which is legitimate and which needs to be followed up and which needs to be done. What industry sometimes suffers from suspicion and people wanting to second guess because somebody has done something which is problematic. So that is one area which we have to develop. I mean, there's no perfection. Just as there's no perfection in government, there's no perfection in both places. So we have to find a way by which we actually make it easier. And the second element which happens is that I think there is sometimes a multiplicity of agencies which need to be consulted. And sometimes then what happens is each agency then, is trying to balance between what it sees as its primary role and function and what it sees as its facilitative role and function for something else. I mean, if my primary objective is that I need to collect as much revenue as possible, now what should be my strategy in terms of collecting revenue? And I'm looking at a very short-term objective is, okay, I'm commissioner of this particular zone or of this particular area for a year. Now, this year I have to make sure I meet my target. So there is a sort of a short-term goal in some of those, which again affects what happens with the longer term. So internally in government also, those kind of issues sometimes come up. Of course, there are other, just as somebody on the other side wants to do something wrong, somebody on this side wants to do something wrong. There might be rent seeking and there are issues of that nature. And if they are brought up, then there is a way in which we can push through and see that that doesn't become too much of a hurdle. And there's a way. See, I mean, very often I'm asked, for instance, you have all these industry development, investment promotion organizations like Invest India, or various states have their organizations, who do nothing but a kind of a liaison role between industry and various wings of government. They go there and say, look, I mean, this is the new investment. Will you support it? Normally speaking, you should not need an organization like that. Correct. Because each agency of government should be able to understand the broader context in which we are doing what we are doing and the way in which we can actually support investment. It is because that is lacking that you need an organization which then sort of, takes a new investor or somebody through the various steps and facilitates and enables the investment to take place. I always think that these are organizations which should have not a very long time frame. You shouldn't be targeting to have an Invest India or a Guidance Tamil Nadu for an endless time frame saying, we'll keep doing this. At some point or the other, you have to say that their mission is done and we are on autopilot. And that is when you will really feel that, all of these issues of ease of doing business are addressed. Frankly, I mean, that is what we need to aim for as a government. That will require, I mean, and I think I see significant improvement and changes in terms of facilitation and a facilitative attitude. It also depends on the kind of exposure that different agencies have, different functionaries have to various aspects of what needs to be done. Some of it is also training, and I think more of that kind of training and capacity building is essential to explain to every functionary, saying that there is a larger context. You know, this is the way enhanced economic activity is going to benefit the country as a whole. And your limited objective there, in terms of protecting that piece of land that you need to allot or sort of taking care of a particular aspect of revenue, while is important, needs to be balanced. And that is the balance which we need to really strike.
Yep. No, thank you. I think there was a lot of clarity, at least from a, broadly what we want to do. I have so many other questions. I know that our time is up, but I want to ask you one last question. When you look at this room, for example, and you find the leaders of the GCCs and truly managing both their global organization and then ensuring that they do their best, moving up the value chain. Most of them have really matured in terms of going far away from the traditional labor arbitrage to something which is truly valuable, creating some of the cutting edge innovation, creating IPs and so on and so forth. So when you look at this GCC ecosystem developing, we are about close to 1,800 GCCs today. I know that we will get to about 2,200 or so in the next few years. And this will grow in terms of not just the number of GCCs, but the people who are working in them, the quality of work they would do. So when you look at the future of next generation of GCCs, are there things that you believe the leaders should focus a little differently on, or anything any advice that you might have for them in terms of moving up this value chain? So sometimes they're worried about the fact that if they do too much of innovation, the government might come after them because, there are taxation issues. We didn't even get into the transfer pricing issues and safe harbor rules and so on. So we won't do that today. But broadly, I mean, we want them to be fearless in terms of going out and creating real value. So, and then they want the government to be an enabler at best or a spectator at worst, not a detractor. How do you make sure that we give them that confidence?
No, I think the one thing that I would certainly tell all executives and others who are present here is that don't let the shadow of concern about some governmental action hold you back. I think it's important for you to realize that, you see, the way business is done, the way production is managed, the way trade is done across the world, the way the economy functions is changing all the time. For what we had a study done recently on the digital economy of India, and we found that it's going to be almost 3 times what it was in a matter of 15 years, roughly. I mean, it was about 6 to 7% of India's economy around 2013-14. It's currently about 12 to 13%, and we expect it will reach about 20% of India's economy by 2030. So the way there can be a digital transformation of India's economy is something which is, and not just India's economy, the global economy is something that we have to prepare for. And we are not 100% sure how exactly it's going to play out. I mean, there is going to be innovation. There are going to be ways in which business is done which might not be what it was earlier. Many of our rules of customs and so on were built around earlier types of businesses.
Correct.
We have to, so it is meant that, okay, I want to prevent dumping of used equipment in India. That is an old objective because somebody was trying to do it at some point in time. But business has evolved and they're doing different things. So the rules of the game and the way that those are managed are something that I think government is prepared to take a second look and prepared to sort of say that we can change this if it doesn't work for business and if we have to adjust it in a different way. We have tried to do it very consciously, including with support from NASSCOM, through various budget discussions and through various other discussions within the ministry, both on labor-related issues and on taxation-related issues. So we are prepared to back you when there is a change which is needed, because that is the way businesses are evolving, that is the way work is evolving, that is the way the transactions are evolving. Today, we are part of a global value chain. Things need to flow across borders seamlessly. We are not holding back. I mean, not that everybody in the world seems to believe it nowadays, but having said that, I think it's important that for an economy like India, the way we get integrated into this and the way we are able to deliver value to people across the world is important. So, to that extent, I think it is. I would strongly urge you to be bold, and strongly urge you to take up innovation, to push the limits. I mean, even now, people come and tell me that, you see, what you're doing in India is not really cutting-edge R&D. You're doing only limited R&D, limited developments. The autonomy of teams which work in India is not as much as it is in the company headquarters. All of this is something that we hear. So I think you should give them a free hand. You should allow them to innovate. You should allow them to research. You should allow them to develop cutting-edge products out of India. And if you can actually register the IP in this country, even that's one step better. And you know, our protection of intellectual property has been second to none in the world. And we will, I don't think India has a record of having stolen anybody's intellectual property. So we won't do that. We respect intellectual property. So to that extent, go ahead. And if you feel there are barriers, if you feel that you need clarity on some taxation measure or some other measure, we are happy to support you. At least my ministry certainly is, and we will back you. And we will sort of walk with you to whichever other ministry in the government of India you need to go to, or whichever other state government, to see that your sets of issues are addressed and we are able to go forward. I mean, ease of doing business is not just about, you know, will you get your building permission quickly, and will the labor inspector not trouble you, or will the taxation guy not be arbitrary. I think it's also about enabling innovation and enabling companies to take up the next order development, and government finding a way to allow the regulatory framework to catch up. So I think we see this. I mean, we are handling artificial intelligence now, and there is a clearly articulated message from government's side that we are not going to put in place regulation which could throttle innovation. So our first order objective, and this, mind you, is very different from what one hears from various Western capitals and various other countries, including the United States, where, I mean, the first order concern is how do we regulate to see that this doesn't get out of hand? We are not looking at it that way at all. We are saying, how can you use this technology, how can you use this horizontal technology across a range of applications so that we are able to improve value, so that we are able to do something for the growth of the economy as a whole and prosperity, and increase the number of jobs. That is our objective. And if there is a piece of governmental procedure which stands in the way, or something which needs to be clarified, or something which needs to be done differently, we are happy to support those changes.